And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, we're going to talk about the matchup that's going to happen later tonight in the WNBA. And it's going to be a little bit of a shorter segment because I have a much longer segment planned out for the fifth segment. Again, stay tuned for that if you're interested to figure out what that fifth segment is. But it's Elimination Day. So the Sun and the Lynx, they're going to match up in Game 5 in the final game of the semi-final round for the WNBA. And this, by far, has been the most competitive series in the entire WNBA playoffs. By far, as of right now, it's been the most competitive series. This series has gone back and forth, back and forth. And it's the only series that ended up going back and forth. I mean, most of the series in the WNBA ended up ending like this. And ever since, people sort of started to find out that the WNBA is rather top-heavy, a lot of people's interest on these games has sort of completely decreased. That, along with the elimination of Caitlin Clark, not many people are really tuning into these playoff games as much as they thought, I guess you could say. Even though, I didn't really think that a lot of people were going to tune in after Caitlin Clark got eliminated, because she, like it or not, she is the face of the WNBA, and might not be the best player, but the face of the WNBA, that is 100% for certain. But this series has gone back and forth, back and forth. The Connecticut Sun ended up stealing the game. They ended up stealing Game 1, and then the Lynx ended up tying the series back at 1-1 in Game 2. So now this was the perfect opportunity for Connecticut to close out the series, having both games at home. But the Lynx ended up winning in the first away game that they played against the Connecticut Sun in Game 3. And that put the Connecticut Sun in a little bit of a hole, because now the Connecticut Sun, they were expected to win back-to-back in order to advance into the postseason. And they played the next game at home. They played Game 4 at home, which they ended up winning. But now they have to go back over to Minnesota, and they have to close out the series away. And this is sort of where most NBA teams end up faltering and end up losing, because they do end up getting the home court advantage, but then the minute they lose that home court advantage against a much more competent team, then they fizzle out. So it's really tough for me to decide exactly who's going to end up winning in this matchup, because the way I see it, if you go to an elimination game, the teams are evenly matched. And this applies for the NBA as well. If you go into a Game 7, but for the WNBA in a Game 5, it means that the teams are neck and neck and they're evenly matched. And chances are, whichever team has the best player on the floor in the final game is going to win the game. Almost always, this is the case. And this, this happened, a very, very solid example of this is in 2020 when the Clippers matched up against the Denver Nuggets, and that series went to 7 games, and the teams were evenly matched. And the best player on the floor that night was Jokic, and surprise, surprise, the Denver Nuggets ended up winning. It also didn't help the Clippers that the second best player on the court was Jamal Murray. So that also impacted their loss as well. And even in several other playoff series, in fact, when Portland matched up against the Denver Nuggets back in 2019, I believe it was, when Kawhi Leonard was still on the Toronto Raptors, the series ended up going into 7 games. And the best player on the floor was CJ McCollum. It wasn't Damian Lillard, but it was CJ McCollum. And CJ McCollum ended up closing out the game for Portland, and they ended up advancing. So 9 times out of 10, the best player on the floor is going to end up winning. Whichever team has the best player on the floor is going to end up winning that Game 7. And even in 2016, in the NBA Finals, the best player on the floor for the Cavs and in general was LeBron James. And that team ended up winning the NBA Finals as a result of that. So this game is going, similar to those series, I think this game is going to go down to whichever team has the best player and the best scorer on the floor. And judging off of the last game, it seems like the best player on the court for this one is going to be Nafisa Collier. So I feel like the Lynx, they have a very, very, very good chance of winning this game. Because in the last matchup, Nafisa Collier ended the game with 29 points and 13 rebounds. Just a masterclass coming in from her. And if she continues to perform like that, and if she plays she doesn't even have to go and drop 29 points. If she drops around like maybe, I'd say 24 and still gets 13 rebounds, the rest of the team is going to follow suit because the rest of the team is going to have home court advantage in this matchup. Now, the Suns, if they want to even win this game, they're going to have to get help from absolutely everybody. And they got that in the previous matchup, but it was at home, right? So they had 4 players in the starting lineup have 15 points or more. And obviously, fantastic production from the starting lineup, but that is what you need when you have home court advantage, and that's what should have happened in Game 3. But unfortunately, they ended up losing in Game 3, and again, one of the big reasons why they ended up losing was because, they did have a very solid outing in the starting lineup, but the bench just there was not enough depth on that bench, and part of one of the big reasons why they actually had a lot of players in scoring in the starting lineup in that game was because their bench was rather weak. But the scoring wasn't all that efficient in that previous outing. Now, in Game 4, the team as a whole ended up playing much more efficiently than they did in Game 3, excuse me, I'm used to the NBA playoff format, so I apologize for that. But in Game 3, they did not shoot nearly that efficiently. But everybody else on the court, they shot 53% from 3 and 53% from the field. Like, that is a very, very tough team to beat. A team that's shooting 53% from the three-point line. That is a very tough team to beat. And it's sort of like, they have to reproduce that kind of efficiency on the road in an elimination game. Not many players are going to be able to meet the moment like that, let alone on the road. And I think that's a little bit too much of a task for the Connecticut Sun. So if any team is to have the best chances of advancing in this WNBA playoffs, it's going to be the Lynx. And it's going to be because of Nafisa Collier, who's going to close out the game. Those are my thoughts. Again, could be completely wrong. I wouldn't be mad if I'm completely wrong, because that would mean Connecticut, the state that I'm in right now, would end up seeing a WNBA finals, and they would have a chance to go up against the Liberty. Now, when they go up against the Liberty, or whichever team goes up against the Liberty, I think the Liberty are going to end up prevailing just because I feel like that team is incredibly stacked and everybody on the roster can perform, and as well as Sabrina and Brenna Stewart. Now, Brenna Stewart's been a little bit shaky in some of these games, it seems like it. So against the Lynx, a team that's notorious for having good defense, maybe Brenna Stewart might suffer and it might actually be a more competitive series than this sort of matchup right here. But this game is going to happen at 8 o'clock. It's going to be on ESPN2 for any of you guys who are interested. And I'll definitely recover this game once the playoff game concludes. So tomorrow I'm going to cover the game and the results of the game. So if you guys are interested in that, be sure to tune into the next podcast tomorrow. But aside from that, that's all that I really have to say about the WNBA playoffs and their matchups. So now we're going to go ahead and go into the 5th segment, where I talk about Karl Anthony Towns and his top 5 power forwards in NBA history. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.